Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Lorri Ballard. Lorri is a licensed clinical mental health counselor. She holds a Master's of Art in Counseling from Southwestern College, a Master's of Science in Adolescent Education from State University of New York at Oswego, and a Bachelor's of Art in Anthropology from Western Washington University. Her clinical experience includes helping individuals with depression, anxiety, grief and loss, trauma, life transitions, and relationship conflicts. Lorri's theoretical orientation is an integration of trauma-informed and evidence-based theory modalities, including EMDR, internal family systems, and depth psychology, primarily a Jungian perspective. Lorri has experience working with a wide variety of mental health issues, including both chronic and acute, and she carries a sensitivity and empathic understanding of her clients' unique struggles and strengths. Lorri's hope is that through continued collaboration between therapist and client, healing, resiliency, and a compassionate and curious relationship with ourselves can be built. So, Lorri, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Yeah, thanks, Jalon. It's great to be here. It was great to hear that introduction.
Thank you. I gave a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was interesting hearing that introduction because it's very much kind of a academically focused, like this is how I got here through the schools that I went to and the things that I studied. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of a long road to get to being a therapist for me. I never even considered it as a young person. I didn't go to therapy as a young person, so it wasn't something that I knew it existed, but I didn't think it existed for me and not for me to work in that profession at all. So, but I always had a really deep curiosity for people. And I think that's why I studied anthropology in my undergraduate. I was always very curious about other people, why they did the things that they did, who they were, where they came from. And so studied that and then became a high school English teacher because I also love to write. And I felt like that would be a place where I could really dive into that and support others that wanted to dive into that as well. And through that, built some really deep relationships with some of the adolescents that I taught. And, they would come in to talk to me about things that were going on in their lives and some pretty difficult things that were happening for them. And I just noticed that I had this capacity to support them. And at that point, I was also starting or had been in my own personal therapy for a while. And so decided to research going back to school and possibly becoming a therapist myself. I guess I also want to share too that, some of my story is about like the emphasis of really who I am is what I do in the world. And I guess I just want to speak to also, like, I'm way more than a therapist. I'm a mom. I'm a partner. I have a lot of like deep love for being out in nature, and I love to ski. And I just want to speak to the like complexity of who I am, because some of my own personal kind of wounding from my history was really this belief of my value is only in what I do in the world.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Based on your experience, I guess, in therapy and as a therapist, how important would you say therapy is? And is it for everyone or just people who've experienced some sort of trauma?
Yeah, so I think therapy is beneficial for most people. Um, it's a tool, like it's a way to connect to a source of internal healing. Um, and I think there are many other paths to that, based on somebody's kind of location in the world and the culture that they are in. And so, yeah, I don't think it's just for people who have experienced deep or bad trauma. I think it can really bring deep insight into the way that we live in the world and the patterns that we're kind of entrenched in. And um, again, I just want to also emphasize that it's not the only way to do that. There are lots of ways to do that, and lots of other cultural practices to do that.
I think even though therapy is becoming more mainstream, it's
Mhm.
still, is a little taboo because people think that to go to therapy, there's something wrong with you, or like you have to come to terms with the fact that you're injured or wounded emotionally. And a lot of times, a lot of people don't want to come to that realization or accept that because they think in doing so, like there's something wrong or that, they're sick or what have you.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important to recognize that, like, we all have things that are challenging and difficult, and sitting in a therapeutic space can bring light to some of that and support to it. And it's not about identifying somebody as broken or ill
Mm,
or pathologizing them. And that's why, I know we'll get into this a little bit, but that's why I really love this modality of internal family systems. Right, we take on these ways of being in the world, these strategies, because at one point we really needed them to survive. And in the current position that we're in, maybe they're not as adaptive or helpful anymore, but the ways that we behave in the world, at some point we really needed them.
mm. I agree with that. And I heard an analogy, or it was a story actually, that kind of put that into perspective so much better. And it was, a family had been cooking Thanksgiving and cutting the turkey in half for so long. It was just a family tradition. And at one point, somebody said, "Well, why are we doing that?" And come to find out that, you know, 100 years ago, or however long it had been, like there wasn't enough space in the oven for the entire turkey to fit, so it had to be cut in half.
Mhm.
And I think that's a great example of doing something based on when we needed to do it, but now it may not be, something that we need to do any longer, like you mentioned.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think therapy can provide that space of, like, getting curious about, why are we just putting half the turkey in when our oven is so much bigger, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it it is very, very helpful for a lot of different things, including very traumatic experiences, but definitely not limited to that.
Mm. Thank you for sharing that.
Mhm.
My next question I want to ask is, how long have you been a therapist, and what has therapy been like for you, as a therapist?
Hmm. So I've been in practice since 2012, so 12 years. And it's been an evolution. Um, I started working in community mental health, working with kids and families, working a lot with youth that were involved in children, youth, and families department. So a lot of kids that were there because of something happening at home and it being reported. Um, and then moving towards private practice kind of in the last 6 or 7 years. So, and now I work primarily with adults. Having two of my own kids at home, I transitioned out of working with kids. It felt like a lot, both to have kids and to work with kids. But yeah, it has, I started out kind of working in one modality, kind of client-centered talk therapy. And over the years, I've learned EMDR and got certified in EMDR, and then learned IFS and got certified in IFS. And IFS now is the primary modality that I work within. And that therapy modality has really asked me to do a lot of work on myself so that I can sit with my clients from a place of curiosity and compassion, and really be present and show up for them. So, yeah, I think over the 12 years, I've stepped much more deeply into who I am. And that's what it's done for me. And it's really allowed me to show up in a more real, supportive way for my clients.
Has being a therapist ever just felt like a job, or is it something that, maybe is dear to your heart? The saying, if you do something you love, you never have to work a day in your life.
Right. Yeah. I definitely, excuse me, I definitely feel like therapy is, for me, it's definitely feels like a calling. Like it's something that I feel like I'm built for. I don't know if that makes sense, but
It does.
yeah, something that I like, the insight and the just the ability to sit and listen is something that, my structure has always been really built for, I think, since I was a little kid. Um, and it does feel like work sometimes. Um, I take insurance, and so I have to do a lot of work with insurance companies and writing notes, and that whole part of it is really, I was just thinking about that this morning as I was doing notes. Like, a part of me hates doing notes. uh, and and when I'm in session with a client, more often than not, it just feels so like right. Like, this is what I'm like meant to be doing. And I do really love it. Um, and it can get hard too, like when clients bring in really challenging issues that they're facing, and challenges that kind of mirror some of my own challenges, that can get hard. And I can get, parts of me can get a little entangled with that. And then I need to really get support and supervision around that. So, um, so yes, I do feel like it's something that I'm really meant to be doing. And there can be a lot of ease in it at times. And there can also be some pretty deep challenges. Yeah.
So let's say you have a client that comes in with some really, really challenging issues,
Mhm.
and it's really heavy. Is it difficult for you to like clock out, go home, and just disconnect from all that? Or do you tend to carry some of that with you and like, think about it on your drive home, or while you're making dinner, or, while you're with the kids?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And I think a question that a lot of therapists kind of grapple with.
Mm.
Um, so I used to take a lot home with me. I used to not know how to not do that. And over the years, like, it's been around identifying like how many clients can I see in a day. And I have practices too at the end of every day that I do, like little rituals internally for myself, like mindfulness practices that I use. And I can tell when I don't use them, like
Mhm.
things feel a little more sticky. I do carry things home with me. So I do feel like having a community around me. I used to, just because of kind of my own past, like, I'm very independent. Like, there's a part of me that thinks like I don't need anyone, I don't need any support. But over the years, what I found, especially with cases that can be a mirroring of my own trauma history, having a community of people around to gain support from has been literally kind of a lifesaver.
Let's say you're having a bad day and, something happened at home. Maybe you got into an argument or, you spilled the milk and it, put you 10 minutes behind on your way to work or what have you. And now you have to go into work and see your clients and your disposition is off. Like, is there a way that you can just like flip the switch when you go into your office and become a therapist, that you separate yourself from even your maybe difficulties that you're having throughout the day?
Yeah, so I guess what I do have some ways I do that, and I'm not perfect at it. Like
Mhm.
sometimes stuff that happens for me can spill over into like my ability to be really present, or show up in maybe the way that I think I should or want to. But I do, like, if that happens, often, again, kind of this is where I feel like IFS has been like very helpful for me. I can sit maybe for a moment with that part that's feeling upset, that's feeling upset that the milk spilled, or that's feeling upset that I said something that felt like not so great to one of my kids, or and work maybe a little bit with that part, or let that part know that like after I'm done with my day here, like I will get back in touch with it, and we can sort some things out. But it's that, sometimes there's not time for that. And, it's not a perfect tool, but it helps incredibly, for those days when I can check in and when I can be with those parts just for a brief moment and just let them know that I will be back in touch with them as soon as my day is over
Yes.
with my clients.
Have you ever like not been able to do that and had to tell the client like, "Hey, I'm sorry, I can't do this right now because I can't be who you need me to be, and I don't think it's fair for me to, continue to do this if I can't give you the healing that you need," or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if I get to that point, I will like cancel clients for the day.
Mm.
Like if I feel like, yeah, there's just so much happening in my life, or something big happened that morning, I'll just need to cancel clients for that day. Like if I feel like I can't really show up. And, occasionally it depends on who's sitting in front of me. Like using discretion around that. But sometimes if something comes up for me, I may just say, I need a moment here. Like something's really coming up kind of strong for me. Like, and I just need a moment to sit with, if they're doing parts work and understand that kind of jargon, I may just say like, I just need to sit with this part for a moment because it needs a little bit of my attention. And my intention around doing that is giving myself some attention so that I can show up for you.
Mm. This was not part of um, the questions that I had posed for you, but I just started thinking, and I just kind of ran with that because I was wondering like how would you do that if, because most people can go to work and if, they're in a bad mood or if they have a headache, they may not necessarily need to be present for someone else. They're just doing tasks. So their mood may not be affected by what they have to do at work. But for you, like, even if you have a headache or if,
Yeah.
like I said, you had a bad day, you have to show up for your client. So I was just wanting to get like a little bit of info on how you would do that. And I think a lot of people would probably be interested in knowing that as well, because if someone is willing to be brave enough and vulnerable enough to go sit with a professional, there may there may not be space for them to ask these type of questions, maybe because they're afraid or maybe because they
Yeah.
just they go into the office and do what they're told, or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, but I thought it was, kind of nice to take a a detour off into these questions just to
Yeah,
allow for there to be some a window into what it's like um, in the world of therapy from the clinician perspective.
yeah. No, I really appreciate that question because I think it is, yeah, we as therapists can be very affected just like everyone else by what's happening in our world. And so, yeah, there are strategies that I use to work with that, and it's not perfect.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes sessions, I'm like, gosh, yeah, I really wasn't as present as I would have wanted to be. And sometimes I can kind of circle back and make some repair around that too with clients. Like, really like coming back and saying, I really recognize that, like, I had a lot going on that day for me and I didn't feel really present for you. And I'm wondering, did you feel that, or how was that for you?
Wow.
So there's also that opportunity for that, like, relational repair, right? Because that happens in the outside world too, right? Where we can't like show up in the ways that maybe we want to all the time for the people in our lives. And so even getting to kind of work on some of that in the therapy room can be very therapeutic for clients. Of like, and they may say, "Oh yeah, I noticed you were kind of like not really paying attention in the way you usually do, and I was wondering if it was something about me, or and I was kind of scared to bring it up." And so, I think it's also an opportunity to really, like, if we can be aware as clinicians that, like, yeah, I didn't really kind of show up in a way that probably felt very supportive. If we can circle back to that with clients, that can be um, very relationally reparative, I think.
Yeah, I think I would appreciate that a lot, especially if I felt that maybe you weren't as in tune as you were normally, and then you come
Right.
back to me the following week and you mention it because somebody may be afraid to speak up.
Totally.
So if you gave me that space and that opportunity to see that you were concerned with maybe a disconnect that happened during a session, that would make me feel really good about being able to see you as a person and trust you and to be able to be vulnerable if I felt that again and maybe
Right.
say speak it up on my own and say, well, hey, you know what, maybe right now this isn't the perfect time for this or what have you, because it would give that open lines of communication between client and therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So a big thing that people are in therapy for is childhood, and our childhood can have a pretty big effect on who we become as adults. And what I wanted to ask was, in your opinion, and based on the work that you've done, how important is our childhood and what type of effect can it have on who we become as adults?
Yeah. So from my perspective, and from the schools that I went to, and, my own personal experience, I feel like childhood can have a very large impact on the things that we carry, the ways that we show up in the world as adults. It can really lead us to embracing, ourselves and our gifts. And it can also lead to us exiling or pushing away parts of ourselves or ways of being in the world because it's not accepted in our family of origin or from our caregivers. There may be a behavior that they didn't like, or that was caused some issue, and that may lead to us exiling, parts or aspects or gifts of ourselves, um, based on, yeah, those early relationships that we have. So yeah, I would say, and that's kind of the way that I work with clients too, is, where did this come from?
Mhm.
Um, where are these patterns, these behaviors and strategies? Where are their origins?
Is that a difficult question for someone who may have childhood trauma to process and sit with?
That particular question.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I would say that I don't actually ask it in that way. With parts work, um, we end up finding, the pattern or strategy of a part. So it may be, I feel a lot of anxiety when I'm in groups. And then we would work with like getting to know this part that feels so much anxiety when it goes into groups, and find out kind of why it's holding that anxiety. And we find out from the part. We ask the part, like, what is it about groups that makes it, really challenging for you? And may find out that, in the past, some sort of shame happened in a group or an injury happened in a group. So now this part carries this strategy around, and the group could be like the family of origin group.
Mm.
Like some sort of injury happened in a group. So this part strategy now is like, I'm going to feel anxious anytime there's a group because there's a threat there of being hurt again, when the threat may actually not be there, but this part is operating from a pattern that it learned early on.
Mm. I've heard that behind every behavior is a feeling. And I think that if we can recognize maybe behaviors that are unhealthy, and instead of just maybe feeling shame or bad about the behavior, we can say, okay, well, what's the feeling behind it? That can be a trailhead to maybe the root of where that part that you mentioned was injured or stems from.
Yeah.
And I think that anything that isn't um let's say focused on the root cause, like if you're worried about your behavior because of anxiety, then you're dealing with a symptom. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right. I do. Yeah, I really do. Yeah. Yeah. And those behaviors, right? At some point, they were adaptive. At some point, they were helpful. At some point, they helped the system survive. And that may not be true in the present, but like, gosh, like, can like if we can approach those behaviors with curiosity, and say like, gosh, where did that come from, or why are you doing it that way? I'm actually really curious to find out. We can find out a lot of information and a lot about like, that it protecting maybe an emotion or an experience that's quite vulnerable.
Mhm.
Because it's easy to judge a behavior. I think it's easy to stand in judgment when we just look at the behavior. But when we look at what's behind that behavior, that strategy, like there can be so much understanding can open up. Like it can be easy to judge, someone who uses or drinks, or it can be easy to judge that behavior, but what is behind it? Like, why is that part using that strategy? What is it protecting? What vulnerability is there?
Yeah, I heard Dr. Gabor Mate say, instead of asking why the behavior, ask why the pain. And oh my
Mm-hmm.
goodness, that
Yeah.
resonated so deeply with me, because if you think about like somebody who's drinking or any behavior that
Yeah,
is to cope, like they're coping because they're in pain.
that's right.
So if you focus on the behavior, you're not really going to get too far.
Right.
But if you get curious about why the behavior, and that leads
Mhm.
you, that because if that behavior is a trailhead to the pain, and the pain can lead you to the injury,
Mhm.
then you can do some real good work, and maybe the behavior will no longer be there if you can heal the injury.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Yep. Hmm. Yeah. That's the beauty of the work. Yeah.
it, it is for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so speaking about childhood, you shared with me that one of the reasons that you became a therapist
Hmm.
was because of what happened to you when you were younger. And because of that, I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind sharing what early life was like for you.
Yeah, sure. Early life was pretty chaotic for me. I experienced quite a few traumatic experiences in addition to relational trauma. I was sexually abused when I was young for several years, from the ages of 6 to about 8. And I also was my mom. There's a legacy kind of in my family of sexual abuse. My mom was also sexually abused, and because of like this legacy of sexual abuse, I don't know if I'm answering the question, but we'll circle back to it.
Sure.
Because of this legacy of sexual abuse, and because my mom carried that, like I I was really a reflection of my mom's pain, of my mom's wounds. And because of that, I think it felt really hard for her to have a connected, secure relationship with me. And so I really grew up with this belief of like, well, first having sexual trauma and feeling like I did something really wrong. Like I must have done something to have had this happen to me. And then having, a relationship with my mom that felt very, very distant, not supportive, and her being, very critical of me, also led to this feeling of like something must be wrong. Like,
Mm.
this is happening to me. My mom is not feeling connected to me. And, as I have done my own work, I can really see that I was a reflection of my mom's own pain. And so it was just so hard for her to see me and connect with me. But as a little kid, I was like, what, it was all about like what was wrong with me. Like I did something wrong. And yeah, and so I think a lot of those experiences really, um, yeah, led me to having all kinds of symptoms, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, feeling a lot of shame, and not knowing how to navigate a lot of it. Um, and wanting to kind of hide a lot of it too, feeling like sharing any of this with anyone was just too much, too painful. And that's also a legacy of my mom, right? Like processing any kind of pain was not like something that happened for her, and then not something that was offered to me, or my sister, who experienced very similar traumas to me. And um so those experiences really eventually led me into going to therapy. Not until I was I think the first time went to therapy was, I think I was 21 or 22. And I was just feeling like I was hit by a truck, like
Mm.
emotionally, just feeling like I couldn't do it anymore. Um, and then started to really understand, why I was feeling the way I was feeling. But yeah, just feeling really relationally disconnected, having kind of pretty chronic and severe sexual trauma, um, were the events that got me into therapy eventually. And then eventually feeling like, okay, like I also want to support people in this way.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry that that happened to you.
Yeah, thanks.
Um, was there ever a point before you started therapy that you spoke to your mom about it? Like, when was it that she told you she was also sexually abused?
It's interesting. She has kind of mentioned it I don't even know that I've ever had like a real conversation. Well, I haven't had a very explicit conversation with her about it. And I was always hearing like bits and pieces. Like my uncles, her brothers shared some with me about it. Actually shared quite a bit about what happened for her. And she has shared with me her mother died in childbirth with her. So that is something that she's shared with me. And that has also, when I spoke of like I'm a reflection of my mom's own pain, like I really feel like that mother-daughter relationship is like so extremely hard for her because of that experience. And then having a stepmom and not ever she has shared that she's always felt like kind of an orphan. So she shared some of that. We haven't, my experience with talking about my mom about sexual trauma was like her getting angry with me about sharing with her what had happened to me. So it wasn't like a very safe, or it definitely wasn't a safe conversation for me, and led to me feeling like, oh yeah, I did do something really wrong.
It may have been that she was angry that it happened to you because it also happened to her, but she didn't have the emotional intellect to be
Mm-hmm.
able to have that conversation with you. So, the very first emotion she may have felt was anger, but it
Right.
may have been misdirected. And then also, like, with her mom dying in
Mm.
childbirth with her, I mean, the I can't even imagine what the mother-daughter relationship with her is like.
Yeah.
Um, and then to have the same experience between the both of you, like, she was probably doing the best that she could as far as trying to be,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I love to acknowledge that those 2 things can coexist, but she may have not known how,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I
her
100% agree with that. Yeah.
being faced with not knowing what to do or how to do it could have made her feel insignificant, and then it could have made her angry because of her lot in life, you know?
Mhm.
But also all of that, I'm sorry all of it happened. I'm sorry it happened to your mom, and I'm
Yeah.
sorry it bled down to you.
Yeah.
And who knows what her mother experienced, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what was it about your experiences, and you touched on it a bit, but what if you could, I guess, kinda hone in on what exactly it was that made you want to become a therapist because of your lived experience?
Mhm. Um, it was really about, I think, being in a space where I could share what was happening for me or what had happened for me and have somebody validate that. And then and then becoming a teacher and then seeing that I could hold that same space for some of my students. Um, I think both of those experiences really led me to being like, okay, this is something that feels really important.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, and I think selfishly there was like an importance in me healing too and becoming a therapist. And then also I really could feel into the importance of wanting to bring that to other people.
Mhm. And you were an English teacher first, correct?
I was, yeah. Hmm.
Do you feel like your experiences with your students, like, made you kinda like a mini therapist because you were trying to give them that healing space too?
Yeah. I mean, I remember after school having kids just come in and sharing their stories and, wanting just a space, like a safe space to share what was going on for them. Yeah. So it felt like kind of pre-training for becoming a therapist.
That's great. I like that. And I'm sure those kids got a lot of therapeutic benefit from having you as their teacher because you were, on your way to becoming a therapist and they didn't even know it.
Thanks. Yeah. I enjoyed it and didn't like the bureaucracy of being a teacher. So it also felt like a nice balance between being able to support people and not have to be kind of entrenched in that system all the time.
I see. Um, I want to quote something that you shared with me because I thought it was so profound and told such a story. Um, you said being seen and it being wrong or being seen and being hurt has been a catalyst for me to focus on others and their pain because a part of me that thought I could find healing, redemption, and value through providing this type of support for others. Can you explain exactly what you meant by that?
Yeah. And now that you're sharing that too, I'm like making connections with my mom. So I'll share that in a minute. Something
Sure.
interesting kind of came to me. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think there, like, until I really worked on that part that wanted to stay hidden, I had this part in me that really believed that if I could help heal or support other people in their healing, that I in some way would heal myself. Um, and I didn't have the opportunity to kind of work with that part until maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But I think this part really held this belief that like I'm going to stay hidden, and through that I'm going to like find healing for myself through other people. Like if I can see them heal, like in some way that means like I I've done like a good job. And I think it was all kind of tied into that belief of like what I do in the world is where my value is,
Mhm.
not in like inherently who I am.
Is that a little bit codependent or codependency, relying on what
Hmm.
you do for others to give you value or meaning?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah,
And do you
yeah.
think that that also stemmed from your early life?
Yes. I mean, I was just thinking my mom she's a pediatrician. She's retired now, but she was like the most dedicated pediatrician I've ever seen. Like wanted kids to be okay.
That makes sense.
And I think really wanted that little part of her to be okay that was so badly hurt. And I that was modeled to me. And then, as a therapist, I was like, God, I really want my little girl to be okay. And the way that I've been modeled to create that healing is through doing it for other people,
Mhm.
which ultimately doesn't work, but was a belief that my system held.
Is that the connection that you made that you mentioned about your mom? Was it her dedication to
Yeah.
being a pediatrician because of maybe her life experience too?
Yeah. And then just hiding behind that profession. Um, like because I think the pain for me, and probably, I'm making a speculation, but the pain for her was so big that it was scary to parts of her. And I know it was scary for parts of me to like even dip my toe into some of what had happened. So I was going to
Mhm.
focus outward on like helping other people heal, um, as opposed to, you know, supporting myself.
I think if we
Does that
don't
make sense?
learn, yeah, it makes so much sense. And I
Yeah.
think if we don't learn um how to care for ourselves or how to find value in who we are, we find it in others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, as long as everybody around us is okay, then we're okay.
Right.
But to me, I feel like that's avoidance on a really large scale, because we never have an opportunity to sit with ourselves. And then, once your ability to do for others or to care for others may start to lessen, then you're just left with you, and you have to sit with all of that, and it could come tumbling down on you.
Right. And I think that there is a part of me that was like, this isn't working.
Mm.
Like helping other people is not, isn't like, it feels like there's a certain amount of like, yeah, this feels like important work. And this part that believed that it would also heal me was like, this isn't working. What are we doing? This isn't helping. This isn't what I thought it would be.
Yeah. Can it be cultural, for people to find value in what they do and not who they are? And what can that look like?
Yeah, I feel like our capitalist society, right? Like that's how we kind of assign value is like, what is it that you do? How efficient are you? How much money do you make? What do you have at your house? What does your house look like? All that. Like, yeah, I think it can be very cultural. And, it was also like a very, like my like personal culture, my family, that was very ingrained in me and my siblings. Like what you do in the world is your value.
Mm. What type of effect can that have on someone later on in life if their value is in, like, maybe their profession and they lose their job, or their value is
Mm.
being, a mom or a housewife or a husband or what have you, and the rug is like swept out from underneath whatever it is that they are identified in.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it can bring a lot of people to their knees. I think it can really impact, like, leave people kind of in a place of maybe some existential crisis. Like, who am I? And yeah, and I think it can go a lot of different ways. And that is something that I see in my profession a lot, is people coming in and wondering, like, I thought this was who I was, and I thought this was going to bring me, joy and happiness, and it's not. And so I don't know what to do.
Wow, that's so big, because like we mentioned, if you don't know how to go inward,
Mhm.
and you're avoiding maybe your past, and all your eggs are in the basket of what you do, and that's no longer there, like you said, it can bring you to your knees and create a crisis, an identity crisis nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that you started therapy, I guess when you were in your 20s, you said?
Hmm.
What type of therapy was it that you started out with?
Um, when I started, I didn't even know to kind of like ask or interview the therapist really. So I just started there, and it was, traditional kind of talk therapy. Maybe, and the therapist definitely had kind of a Jungian perspective of like, yeah, visiting childhood stuff and knowing that informs kind of what's happening in the present. Um, so yeah, kind of very traditional talk therapy. And um, yeah, I was feeling very depressed at that point. So there was a relief in like getting validation around, okay, yeah, I see you and I see what you're going through, and it makes sense based on what's happened for you. Um, and doing the traditional kind of talk therapy didn't actually, some of the traumas that I experienced, it didn't really hit on supporting those or helping me reprocess through those. So I transitioned several times into different kinds of therapy. um, doing quite a bit of EMDR, which was helpful. And I think did not provide the the internal relational repair and support that my system really needed. Because it did help with some of the like intrusive thoughts and memories of sexual trauma. But the part that experienced that and the part that was holding the burdens and the beliefs around that in EMDR never got that presence of self coming in and saying, I see you and what is going on, and I'm here to support you. And that's where like transitioning into IFS as a client and also as a therapist, I'm like, wow, this is like so relational and so what my system and what a lot of systems need that have experienced trauma in relationship.
I think if it's one thing that I've learned just from listening to you speak is that therapists are people too, and it's so nice to hear you speak about your past experiences and your struggles, because I don't know that a lot of people really understand the fact that just because you have all the tools and training and experience, when we come to see you, like we expect you to be, this superhuman person and, fix us and don't have your own problems and things of that nature. So even though you had been in therapy for a while, was there ever a point where you maybe felt like you would never reach like true healing?
Yeah. And I guess I just want to say something first about what you said about like that therapists are real humans. That I think that was like the tradition of therapy for a long time, is that you do not, and there's, discretion around disclosure, but like that you are just like a blank slate and you just kind of, you hold space. So I think that comes from this tradition of therapy of how clinicians were taught initially, is that you are not involved really very much in the process. And sorry, what was the second part of that question, Dylan?
Was there ever a point where you felt like, in your therapeutic journey as a client, that you would never get to a point of true healing?
Yeah, there was. And it was really after doing quite a bit of EMDR therapy, because I knew I had a traumatic past, and I knew that EMDR was this evidence-based modality that was important and helpful for trauma. And I did probably 2 to 3 years of EMDR work, and after that, there was healing, and like I still was feeling, there were things coming up for me that were not healed. I was still having symptoms of feeling quite depressed, really anxious. And so that led to feeling kind of hopeless or a bit helpless. Like, is this just going to be the way, like, I'm just going to have to learn how to cope with these symptoms just kind of being around all the time, or often, maybe not all the time, but often.
This was when you were already a therapist?
Yeah.
Wow. So to be a therapist and to have clients that you're healing,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe your clients are getting to a point where they're actually healing their traumas and getting better,
Mm-hmm.
and you were feeling like maybe that wasn't possible for you.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be tough.
Yeah. 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 And I also like, it was really, I was working with an EMDR consultant at the time, because I was
Can I
working.
jump in really quick?
Yeah,
And
sure.
for maybe someone who doesn't know what EMDR is, can you explain what EMDR is?
Sure. So it stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which I know is like a mouthful, but it's an evidence-based modality used to address trauma, and it works with accessing traumatic content through bilateral stim. So either through eye movements or tapping, or a light bar where your eyes are moving back and forth. And it's been shown that using that bilateral stim will help you access different things, targets. So maybe targeting some sort of abuse or a car accident. And then having that bilateral stim go through the session, and it helps to soften the beliefs. Sometimes there's flashbacks, so it helps soften all that, so that it's not intrusive and pressing on the present. And oftentimes in trauma, we carry negative beliefs about ourselves. And so it also helps to transition those negative beliefs to positive beliefs. And just thinking if there's anything else I want to say. Do you have any, does that feel clear? Do you have any questions?
It does.
Yeah. Okay. And so there's a whole protocol that you use, and a whole phase oriented protocol that you use in EMDR to support somebody through reprocessing traumatic events. And then what was the other question?
Where were we? So I was asking you had been helping your clients, but at the same time, you felt like you weren't at a point to where you would find true healing.
Okay. Yeah. So I was working with the EMDR consultant at the time, who was, I'd go in and talk to her about cases, and then I mentioned a little bit about my personal experience with EMDR with her too. And she's like, you really should look into parts work. I think that would be really like helpful for you. I think it would be helpful for your clients. I think it'd make a lot of sense to you. And I was actually pretty resistant to, I was like, gosh, I don't want to add another, I don't want to study another modality. Like there was a part of me that was pretty resistant to it. That felt just kind of tired. And then I found out about this, like kind of this intro course to it, and decided to take it. And I was like, wow, this makes so much sense to me. And I feel so much possibility around healing and around supporting my clients' healing, that I like dove headfirst into learning more about it. And it also really, IFS, like really, to be a self-led IFS therapist, really, I want to use the word demands. I don't know if that feels like quite the right word, but I'm going to use it anyways. Demands that we, like as clinicians, really do our own work. And don't, like, I felt like with EMDR, again, I was kind of like, I could hide behind the protocols, the modality. Like I wasn't really stepping into, myself in the room, and supporting clients from that space. So yeah, it's just felt like a pretty amazing transition and journey for me. And I still use some EMDR, but primarily work from the IFS perspective.
Can you explain what the internal family systems modality is?
Yeah. So in IFS, we hold the belief that everyone has a self and everyone has parts. And the self is described through the 8 C's. So the self is curious, compassionate, clear, calm, connected, courageous, confident. So every client that walks into my office, I know that that capacity is there. I know it's in me. I know it's in you. And in IFS, the work is to build relationship between parts of ourselves and ourself, because that self has the capacity to heal and support parts with letting go of burdens that they've carried around for a long time. It has the capacity to sit and be present and listen and witness anything that's happened. Yeah, so that's kind of just a very brief picture of IFS. We also have we have parts that carry burdens and that are burdened, and that that have strategies that are maladaptive or not so great in our present day. We also have parts that are really like very functional too, and very helpful, and are, you know, work in a present oriented way, and are not burdened. So, but the therapeutic work is really building connection and relationship with those parts that feel like they kind of have to keep doing what they're doing, or something bad's going to happen.
Parts that are stuck in the past, or maybe still responding to an injury or an event, and they're trying to, I guess, warn you to be careful, or tell
Right.
you, you know, we can't do this because the last time we did this, that happened.
Yeah.
I understand that. I do. So
Yeah.
you transitioned from EMDR to internal family systems. What was that transition like for you personally? And then what did it do for you in your practice and with your clients?
So personally, I was like, wow, like I am a pretty amazing, like I got to know myself, which was, and it like led me to a place of like, wow, that like I really love myself. I love my parts. Like I can actually say that, and I can feel that. Um, which, which for me, growing up for so long thinking like I'm wrong, or I don't belong, or I did something wrong, like that has been huge. Um, and like that absolutely reverberates out into the therapy space, um, of like my like own love of myself and my parts, like actually carries a very different energy in the space than an energy of like I don't feel very like loving towards myself. I feel like I'm doing something wrong, or I'm concerned I'm going to do something wrong in here, like more of like an anxious energy. So and it's like I am so much more confident in, you know, my clients' capacity to bring really internal relationship with their parts. Like it kind of speaks about that kind of codependency we were talking about earlier. Like I know my clients may need some support and guidance, but I also know that they have what they need inside of themselves to provide healing and support for those hurt parts. And it's
It's
not to say we don't need relationships outside of that. We do. We do need relationships outside of that. And like our primary support can be ourselves.
I love that. I was gonna say, it sounds like you finding IFS gave an opportunity for that part of you that needed to find purpose and identity in helping others, to kind of take a step back, because now you saw that your clients, and I guess anyone else who you may have been led by that part to help, now you realize that they had it within themselves to do it. So all you had to do was kind of just, I guess, be a guardrail for them to direct them in whatever direction they needed to go in order to see what it meant and what it felt like to be to be able to access their self.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that probably did a lot for you and allowing you to step into those 8 C's, and also be self-led and let that codependent part kind of retire a bit.
Yeah. I'm really glad you mentioned that because I like that part of like I can kind of hear that part of me. It's like so relieved. It's like, thank
Mm.
God you found this because I was so damn tired.
That's funny. I understand that because I had a people pleaser part that
Hmm.
I think was probably my biggest and most um or loudest part when I first found IFS. And immediately, like, I realized it, and that part was able to kind of take a step back and retire.
Hmm.
And I felt it in my nervous system. I felt my anxiety relax. I felt it relationally, like, because I would be having a conversation with somebody and they could say something to me about a movie or about anything, and then they'd be like, "Well, have you seen that movie?" And I would be like, "Yep, yep, yep." Just
Hmm.
because I felt
Yeah.
like if I didn't agree, I would be doing something that would make them unhappy, or I wouldn't, they couldn't tell their story. So instead of just being like, "No, I never saw that movie, but like tell me about it," I would feel like I would have to agree.
Yeah.
And that was on such a large scale with so many things. So when I finally like realized like you don't have to do that, it was such a relief for me.
Yeah. A relief for that part, maybe too. Yeah.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, so we talked about the self a little bit, and accessing self, I believe, is possible once our parts have an opportunity to step back and they trust us.
Hmm.
Is is it possible that therapy can replace that true sense of self, or getting to a place where we can be self-led? Like, can therapy ever replace that inner self, that inner guidance?
Mm. So I have a couple different responses to that. No, I don't think that it can ever replace it. I think it can help support clients in identifying it, in finding it, in getting to it.
Sure.
Um, and sometimes um, clients or even ourselves, even myself and my therapy, like we can come in very what we call blended with the part, right? So that part, we are the part. I am like really anxious. Um, and sometimes the support of an IFS therapist is to be the self for that part. So in a way, like, and the intention of that is to guide them towards feeling that self in them. But so I think it's not kind of exactly a yes or no question or answer. I think that sometimes the therapist is the self in the room, um, because of how blended the client may be or how much the part may be sitting in that seat of consciousness. And then once the client system can kind of see how curious or compassionate or connected the therapist self can be with that part, sometimes that really invites in the self of the client to be in relationship with that part that's anxious or that part that's angry or that part that's feeling a lot of fear.
Wow. It almost sounds like a safe space allows for self energy to be shared if the client hasn't develop the skill of accessing their self, or if their parts don't allow them to be in self energy.
Right. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes those qualities of self, or those C words just kind of point towards self. They aren't self itself, if that makes sense. But that curiosity, right? Like being curious may not have been like a safe place, like a safe experience to have as a kid. Um, or being connected may not have been safe. And so yeah, sometimes the clinician is the self in the room for the client. It could be for a pretty extended period of time. It could be quick. Yeah.
there was something else that you said that I really, really was intrigued about. And you said that self begets self. And it
Hmm.
seems like this is kind of what we're talking about. But can you explain exactly what you meant by that?
Yeah. If I'm sitting with a client who is, comes in very angry, and if I can stay self-led, work with my parts that maybe have fear or ideas around anxiety to just let me lead. And if I can be with that part that's coming in that's really angry and hold curiosity towards it, or really get to know it, really connect with it. Often the client will be like, whoa, I did not know that's why I was angry, or I didn't know why that part was doing it in that way. It's actually doing it to protect me. And I
Hmm.
actually feel like I really appreciate it now, or I feel a lot of tenderness towards it now. And so, yeah, so when I'm able to bring my self energy in and hold space and validate parts, not collude with them, but validate them, it can actually really invite in the self energy of the client.
Let's say somebody listens to this episode and they say to themselves, you know what, I've been in therapy for some time now, and I don't feel like I'm where I want to be. And now they're a little bit curious about IFS because of what they heard it did for you. And maybe they just weren't familiar with it. What would you say to them?
I would say start to look into it. If you're feeling curious about IFS, then there's something about it that's resonating with you. And I would say definitely look into it. And there's lots of places to do that. There's lots of great podcasts, there's lots of books. The IFS Institute has some short videos on IFS. They also have a list of practitioners and therapists. I think across the US, and I'm not sure if therapists are listed kind of worldwide. Maybe they are. But anyways, there's a directory on there where you can look up IFS therapists in different locations.
Sure.
Sure.
Okay, so I wanted
Okay,
to
so
ask you, what gifts has IFS given you personally, and have those gifts bled over into your clients?
yeah, so I think the biggest, well, I think maybe I've said a little bit about this already, but yeah, I mean, it's given me the gift to like see myself, see my parts, and not only see them, but really like love them and recognize, why they've been doing what they've been doing. And really it's about like wanting to protect vulnerability. And so I think that's really the biggest gift. Like I feel so much more kind of rooted and grounded in who I am, and appreciative for the strategies that some of my parts used, and very willing to support them and letting go of the strategies that they don't want to hold on to anymore, or that aren't really functional anymore. So um and and the gifts that it's like, it's given my clients the gift of like me really being able to show up in the room. And I think also just the gift of the process of them being able to find love for themselves. and their parts.
That's beautiful. Um, I believe so strongly in IFS because of what it's done for me personally, and the more I hear about it, the more stories that I hear from other people, like, and then having the opportunity to read No Bad Parts, and then to interview Dick and do a couple of unburdening sessions with him, like, I feel like IFS is the modality, and I will stand by that 100%. I think if anybody is in therapy and is not having the results that they want, please give IFS a chance because it's life changing. And the person that you can become not only will benefit you, but it will benefit those around you. It really just is a wonderful gift to the world. I feel that way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And there's a lot of I think IFS provides like this beautiful framework for like our psyche. And like once we start working with our internal world, it's almost like that structure kind of falls away, and what we're presented with is really like who we are, and we can get to know it in all these creative ways, and we can work with our ancestors, we can work with even like kind of institutions that have had impacts on us. I mean, it becomes a very vast modality that allows for a lot of movement and a lot of creativity within it.
I agree. And I feel like it's never ending because there are so many parts that I've worked with and found, and there are still some now that I'm finding. And I'm just like, I've been at this for a couple of good years now. But I feel like, the more you do, the more you find. And healing, I don't think has a destination anyway. So it's going to be something that's lifelong because, I've read a book and gotten a lot out of it and then revisited it sometime later and been like, oh my goodness, like there's so much more that I didn't see. And it's because of the insight that I have now. And I feel like IFS is the same way.
Yeah, and it's one of my Derek Scott, who recently passed, who was one of my first IFS teachers. He always said that parts hear different. He can hear different things in different ways at different times, and so one part may like get something in a way now, and then 5 years down the road may get it a different way because of the healing that it's had. And so it is like it's vast, and there's so much possibility within it.
I agree. Well said. All right, last question. If anybody is out there who is struggling with their mental health and emotional health and doesn't know what to do and is on the fence with talking to somebody, but they want change, they want something different, what would you say to them to encourage them?
I guess I would say, like, I see you, and I know it can be hard. I know kind of stepping into healing and finding compassion for ourselves can be very hard, and it's possible. And finding a community or somewhere where you feel like you don't have to hide, where you can actually show up and you can feel validation or affirmation, I would say find that, because that will be a path towards healing.
Thank you for that. Thank you so much. Thank you for this. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for sharing your personal vulnerable experiences and for doing the work to heal yourself so that you can allow space for others to benefit from the work that you've done and the gifts that you were gifted through therapy. Um, I think that you're an amazing clinician. I think that your story deserves to be heard, and I'm honored to be able to allow others to hear it.
Thank you so much, Dylan. I really appreciate this opportunity. It's also like a very healing opportunity for me to step into being seen and for those parts of me that feel like they've had to hide. So I really appreciate this opportunity.
If someone wanted to find you online, where could they find you at?
So Luna Counseling is the name of my business. So lunacounselingllc.com is my website, and you can contact me through there. That's the easiest way.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Well, Lori, again, thank you so much for this. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for sharing, giving others an opportunity to maybe hear your story if they have a similar story, and know that there is possibility and hope, and that a therapist is, no different from them. It's just maybe the work that you've done, and that they can see relatability in you. So I'm grateful. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do, and thank you for how you do it.
Yeah. And thank you for who you are.